The Adult Ballet Studio is a podcast featuring conversations with the empowering voices of the adult ballet community, a world where passion has no limits and dreams can take flight. My name's Elizabeth Blossfield, and I'm an adult ballet dancer and your host. Welcome to the studio. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome back to the Adult Ballet Studio. I loved talking to our guest this month. Pirkko Markula is a contemporary dancer and professor of socio-cultural studies of physical activity at the University of Alberta in Canada. She has a Ph.D. in kinesiology and major sports sociology from the University of Illinois. Beyond academia, she's a dancer herself, training in the dance department at the University of Illinois with an emphasis on Merce Cunningham, Paul Taylor, and José Limón techniques. She studied Eric Hawkins' technique with Randy Howard in Hamilton, New Zealand as well, and she's currently a choreographer and dancer for Initial 6, a contemporary dance company for dancers above the age of 40 at the University of Alberta. She continues to dance into adulthood, studying not only contemporary but ballet as well. Combining her love for movement and academia, one of her areas of research is dance and exercise in contemporary culture, with an emphasis on dance and the aging process. This is how I originally discovered her work. I read her article all about what we can learn from adults who study ballet on her Psychology Today blog, Femininity, which I'll link to in the show notes if you're interested in checking it out. I loved digging into some of her research into these topics. She discussed with me the ways that adult ballet dancers discover a sense of self in a ballet class, learning to identify as ballet dancers, and learning that they can dance at any age by being surrounded by classmates who are doing just that. Something else that drew me to her work is a collection of essays she edited with students and colleagues published in January 2018 called the Evolving Feminine Ballet Body. I'll link to a copy of that on Amazon in the show notes as well. These essays explore a range of topics regarding the ways that ballet has influenced contemporary culture as it's evolved. With this evolution, what's viewed as the ideal ballet body has evolved as well. Markula and her colleagues examine in these essays how ballet has contributed to broader cultural narratives, and especially how body ideals in ballet have influenced societal views of femininity, beauty, and womanhood. We also talk about some of the projects Pirkko is working on next, and she gives some advice to adult dancers for navigating the challenges of a complex art form. I do want to mention before we get into this episode that we discuss body image and touch on disordered eating during this conversation, which I know can be a sensitive topic. That discussion begins at around minute 14 and continues until minute 29, in case you want to skip ahead but still hear Pirkko's other great insights. All right, that's enough of me talking. Let's get to the interview. Check out what she had to say.
Hello, nice to finally connect.
It's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I love talking about dance, ballet, and
Me too, and I'm really fascinated by all of the work that you're doing, so I'm excited to dive into it because I was taking a look at some of your research, and it's really interesting, some of the subject areas that you cover. So could you talk about some of your background and the work that you do, just for anyone who isn't familiar with it?
So I actually received my Ph.D. from the United States, from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And while I was studying the sociocultural aspects of kinesiology and sport and exercise, I also danced with the dance department, and sometimes probably spent more time in the dance department than with my studies. So dance has been my long-time passion. However, it became a bigger part of my research when I moved to University of Alberta, and the granting agencies were such that I was able to apply granting and grants for dance. So that's how it became a bigger part of my research program.
I love that you have the background as a dancer as well, and then kind of translated it into your research.
Yeah. Actually, we do have a dance company. It's called Initial 6, and we are all contemporary dancers, and we are all over age 40. So it's a private pleasure to dance together.
I love that. It's amazing. I didn't know that. So you're still currently dancing with that company. Wow, that's great.
Yes.
Well, I can't wait to talk about that too, because I was reading that you have a background in dance and choreography as well, especially contemporary dance. And that's great. And I know that you study dance. As you said, you focus a lot of your research on dance and aging. So what drew you to that space in particular?
What drew me into the dance and aging aspect of dancing was, of course, I'm aging. I mean, everybody's aging, but I'm aging myself. Officially, I retired from dance when I was 40 because we are somehow supposed to retire when we are 40 or earlier. I mean, that's just a myth. But then when I arrived to University of Alberta, we seemed to have such a wonderful community of dancers who were definitely over 40. And we were all at the same faculty and we started dancing together. And it just seemed so good that then I started to study dance through a grant, as an aging through a grant. So it involves our dance company, Initial Six, but also community dancers. We also organize, as part of my grant, ballet classes with their local ballet company and it's called 55 plus. So it's women and men. And it's taught by either one of their company members or ballet dancer from the community. One of my students is a ballet teacher, so I go to her classes.
Amazing. I love this. I didn't know that you were continuing to dance into adulthood. And I think that's so great because I think you're right. There's such a misconception that we have to sort of end our dance careers in our 30s or 40s. And it's just not true. So how did you get initially connected with the contemporary company that you're dancing with now and kind of decide to continue your career as a dancer into older adulthood?
So originally, we all worked at the same faculty. And we just thought, why don't we perform together? We have nothing. We have no classes. We have no performance opportunities, but we still kind of like to do it. So that's how we started. Yeah, we were all in the same faculty. Some of them were my students.
How did you first get interested in dance, or what was your first sort of introduction to it? Was it when you were young?
Yes. So actually, I did start with ballet when I was age 7. But in my little community, then there weren't any other kind of offerings. But then when I became a university student, that's when I was introduced to modern or contemporary dance. So that's how I kind of started. But of course, the training, so I came to the university track. But of course, the training also includes ballet. So that's why I'm still doing ballet. I think it's very useful, although I certainly wouldn't be a professional ballerina.
I mean, there's so many benefits and uses for ballet in your life, even beyond, a professional career in it. So I think that's great that you're continuing to study that as well as contemporary. And I'm curious because we have so many people come on this podcast who are dancers and they're such overachievers like you. They do so many different things. So how have you balanced your academic career with your dance practice as well? And is that tricky, or are there any sort of tricks that you've learned for balancing everything?
Well, I kind of separated them the longest time. Like I just did my studies in socio-cultural and I was specializing in exercise and women's exercise. I mean, it's kind of close, but group fitness is quite different from dance. And then I just did my dancing aside as a kind of private affair. And I only started to combine them when I started to do this type of research called performance ethnography. So this is a research created by Norman Denzin, who is one of the major qualitative research figures, or was, in social sciences. And the idea is that you express your research results through performance. So that's how I started to express my research results, through dance performance. And that's in academic settings. So it's a little different from dance performance to an audience. So it's kind of a different genre that combines theory, maybe some research findings, and then you express that through movement.
That's fascinating. I don't know anything about this area of research, and I think it's really interesting. So you're presenting your research in an academic setting, but you're also performing as well.
Yes, and that always surprises them because, as you know, in academic conferences, people talk. But at the same time, we study physical activity. So in that sense, it fits quite well that you incorporate that and you don't just talk. But still, it's by no means common. But I think it's very exciting.
I think that's exciting too, because movement, it's always said, especially, with dance and ballet, that movement gives you language when, you can't express something with words. So I think combining both of those is a great way to get, that education across.
Yeah, the dancing body seems to be quite alluring. So they are, when the dancing body is there in front of them, it just has this effect. It's really very interesting.
Yeah, it is. And so moving, and it probably helps. It probably helps, students or, people who are, learning about this research that you're doing to sort of comprehend it in a different way, which is fascinating as well. And I was reading in your bio that one of your areas of focus is investigating how to create more ethical movement practices by using existing knowledge and also kind of moving things forward. So can you talk about this area of your research?
So amongst my many things, I'm also a group fitness instructor. So that's how I got originally into that research area. So then I wanted to combine my fitness instructor background with dance. And you must be aware of those bar classes that are now part of fitness. So I started to teach the bar classes. And then based on my research, I wanted to move them away from kind of just creating some sort of a body beautiful that none of us can have because it's so impossible, to more of an enjoyment of movement, thinking about how we can improve everyday functionality through movement, how we can strengthen maybe muscles that are really weak through movement, instead of just thinking, do I have a tight or do I have tight abs or are my triceps really flabby? That kind of thing, to move away from that, to think more positively about if we move well, we will live well.
And I think that's so important because, so much of it in, exercise classes and dance is focused on how you look. You kind of get in that cycle of thinking about it. And it makes sense because you're surrounded by mirrors, and comparing yourself to other people. But yeah, if you move well, then you live well. It's so much of it is internal. So I think that's a great point. And I'm curious, in your work, studying movement and the aging process, what are some of the most common misconceptions that you encounter about movement and aging? Because I know you mentioned, obviously with ballet, we can dance well into adulthood. So that's kind of a misconception about it. Any others that you encounter in your work?
Dance in general, the idea that you pretty much can't do anything, right? And like in the blog that I wrote, the dancers typically in these kind of classes, they want a challenge. And especially like dancers like me who are well trained. We don't want to have only simple classes. We can go to fitness or something to do. So we want to have certain kind of complexity. And that helps us. But while it's scary to maybe do combination, we still want it. We want that challenge. We want the flexibility challenge. We want, the coordination challenge. We want the balance challenge. So one of the things is that, you are over 50 or whatever, over 40, so it's kind of going to be chair exercise or something simple for you. But we don't necessarily enjoy that. If you're a beginner, you might. So I guess there needs to also be an idea that you have different levels. Often aging people are all put in the same class, and it might be people from 50 to 90, right? So that's a huge age difference. Nobody would put, 10-year-olds and 40-year-olds in the same class. But in aging, we just think, the same thing. They can't do anything. So one of the misconceptions is that there are no different levels. And especially now with the people who are aging are in their 50s, they are quite fit. So it's not that not everybody, but many are. So it's not like they can't do things. So a certain challenge, appropriate challenge is also needed. But at the same time, they can also know what they want. So the instructors should then listen to them and also provide modifications that, you do this, you do that. Like in our dance group, we have all sorts of previous injuries and things, and people just modify based on what they can do.
Right. And I think that's a great point because you're right. Adults do love to be challenged, and so many adult dance classes are just beginner level. There's nowhere you can go after that. And I think that's a great point. And I know you mentioned your blog, which I want to talk about too. But in one of the articles in your blog, you did mention that a mark of sort of a good instructor in a fitness class or a ballet class is someone who's able to accommodate for all different levels, all different backgrounds. So what advice would you give to as an instructor yourself and as a researcher? What advice would you give to dance instructors, fitness instructors for building sort of an inclusive classroom that accommodates all different learners?
One would need to be well educated, right? So I guess I'm lucky because I have a background in kinesiology. So to know also the anatomy, the body, then biomechanically correct movement patterns will help. So oftentimes, like one of my students who is studying ballet pedagogy, she thinks that lots of ballet teachers are just kind of educated by other ballet teachers with lots of unquestioned, taken for granted traditional things. So she wants to teach very differently, kind of anatomically, biomechanically correct movements while still having a ballet flair. So to be able to do that, one would, of course, need to be educated beyond what you might have done in your own ballet class or in your own dance class. And that's what I was also trying to do in my own fitness classes, to think to be functional, you also need to know what is the correct way of using your body. And so to me, that's very, very important when one also designs the movement, to also think, what am I offering to these dancers? Why am I offering this? Is it safe? Is it necessary? And especially if you want challenges, so then it becomes even more demanding to do it in a correct way.
And that's all really great advice for instructors, to follow when they're sort of building a curriculum. And I know that, as you mentioned, you have a Psychology Today blog. It's called Fit Femininity. And you sort of explore the intersection of culture, gender, and exercise in this blog. So how long have you been blogging about that topic, and what sort of led you to start that in the first place?
The Psychology Today blog editors contacted me and said, "Do you want to blog?" And I said, "Sure, what should I blog about?" And so that's how we came up with this title, Fit Femininity. So obviously they wanted me to write something about femininity, the requirement for that ideal body. What can that be? Why should we do it? So that's how they purely asked.
Oh, and I love all your articles. I was reading them, in preparation for this interview. There was one in particular, you mentioned body image, a blog post from March, where you talk about whether studying ballet is bad for body image. And I thought it was so interesting. In the research that you shared, it found that professional ballet dancers who face a lot more pressure in ballet were more dissatisfied with their bodies, but actually recreational adult dancers expressed that they were pretty satisfied with their body image as compared to other gym goers and, sedentary adults. So can you talk about some of the key takeaways that you found in that research that you presented in the article?
Yeah, but you were ballet dancer before. So when you're in the industry, it's quite different, isn't it? Because it's not only about what you think and what you want, but you have the industry pressure. We are still supposed to look a certain way as ballet dancers. Of course, it depends on the company, but still in general manner, we are supposed to be those hyper-flexible, long-limbed, very thin, as women particularly. So the industry creates that pressure. Also, if you want to be successful and have a job, there aren't that many jobs anyway. So that creates the difference between a professional ballerina, and also creates pressure for the professional training, because women are just dropped because they are told you don't have the body, no matter what you can do, but you don't have the of a ballet dancer. So that's different. Whereas the recreational dancers do not have that pressure to look a certain way. But in my own study of these were recreational contemporary dancers, they still felt like they have to look a certain way. And they certainly trained so hard and ignored their injuries just because they felt like we have to, although there was no need to do that. So I think that image that we have as dancers being particularly thin is still so strong that we live to it. Even as recreational dancers, we can be happier with it. But if you perform, the audience will still look at you and you still feel that kind of pressure, even if it's not openly there. So the one thing we can learn, the industry is like that. But how to change the industry? I don't know. Maybe you can answer that better. But how to change that is very, very difficult. And how to change the kind of generic audience understanding that this is the most beautiful, most aesthetic way of doing ballet if you look a certain way. That's difficult. And as recreational dancers, we should not really buy into that. Because what matters is what we can do. It should not matter.
And it's a tough question to answer, especially when you're talking about industry transformation overall. I don't know that I would have a better answer either, but I think you did touch on, some important things in that blog post. You mentioned in the article that, an emphasis on the positive qualities of ballet rather than simply thinness can help sort of move past that mentally. You're dancing to music, you're socializing, you're experiencing the physical benefits and the mental benefits of it as well. Do you have any advice, especially as someone who performs performs with a contemporary company as well for dancers who are struggling, with that body image, especially, having, an audience look at them all the time, as you mentioned, being in front of mirrors. How can they sort of move past that mentally?
Yeah, if I could answer that question and if I could help someone, that would be great. Also, one could say that, like contemporary modern dance was born as a resistance to ballet. You don't have to look that way. You don't have to move that way. You don't need to have those point shoes that limit you to certain kind of movements. So we should be freer, it doesn't matter how you look. But it does, because it's still an industry, right? And like in our faculty, that is a kinesiology faculty, not dance faculty, eating disorders and body image dissatisfaction with women is huge. And in dance departments, it's even worse. And I think the teachers might try their best. And I think we need to keep trying to emphasize the idea that doing is more than looking. But like I said, fight against that and to make the dance industry in general to change and have different types of people dancing is difficult. But there are changes, right? There are now different types of bodies dancing and doing things. So I think it's slowly changing. But the dancers themselves, how to encourage them to think rather, what am I capable of? Rather than letting somebody else tell me, oh, your quadriceps is too big, you're too muscular, you're too fat, you do this and that. And I guess as teachers, we should also have a responsibility to not to do that and encourage dancers to dance, not to diet. So an individual dancer, I don't know what to really say to them, except trying to encourage to say that that's only a construction. It's not a natural thing. You don't have to be that.
And I think, that's some great advice that you shared. It is a tough question. It's so tough to work through some of those challenges. And I think it does start, with instructors and, even, the people at the top in ballet companies. But I think for the individual dancers, as you said, just asking yourself, what am I capable of? And trying so hard to tune out those outside voices. It's easier said than done, but I think that's a great piece of advice. And I want to skip ahead. There's another article I want to talk about, but I want to kind of jump ahead a little bit because on this body image discussion, you edited a collection of essays back in 2018 called the Evolving Feminine Ballet Body. So can you talk about what those essays explore and what did you learn from the process of editing that collection?
So that collection came about because I was realizing like, oh my goodness, I have all these wonderful students. We all talk about ballet. Why don't we have a book? That would be wonderful. So that's how it all came about. And they explored various kinds of things. So one of my students explored specifically recreational ballet classes, and she was trying to figure out what do they think about from time, space, and the movement practice in the ballet class. Do they ever question them? Should they question them? And she was using this theorist called Michel Foucault, who thinks that if you question practices, it kind of makes you docile, kind of an unthinking person who takes things for granted and just kind of carries on. And Michel Foucault thinks that thinking is important. So she looked at that recreational ballet class and found that, oh yes, they took many things for granted, but they also questioned many things. So they weren't like entirely docile. And these were beginner ballet dancers. Another one that to my mind was very interesting. So this student's doctoral thesis was looking at children's books and sport. And when she was looking for children's books through searches, so many books came that were about ballet. And so she wrote a whole book. She searched for the sport and ballet books came. So then she was looking at the ballet books in her children's books that were looking at ballet. They were very, very interesting. I loved that project. I was looking at myself, the popular program, at least at that point, So You Think You Can Dance. So I was looking at how ballet was represented in that program. They have less ballet people than they have all sorts of other dancers. So that was also interesting how the ballerinas then were constructed as certain types of dancers within that program. What else did we have in it? Yes, and then another ballet student of mine, who was a ballerina herself, she studied how young girls in a particular ballet studio what were they thinking about their activity? What were they thinking about? Why were they so devoted? Like they spent, I don't know, 20 hours in the studio being dedicated. Although they didn't really think necessarily to be professional dancers. So she looked at their experiences. What did they think of their bodies? What did they think of their activities in general, their dedication and passion to dance? Then two dancers looked at, they had a specific company for people experiencing disability. And they were looking at what kind of training did these people want, particularly in terms of ballet. And most interestingly, oh yes, they were the same as, aging dancers. They wanted challenges. They wanted real ballet classes. They didn't want, to something that, oh, you're experiencing disability, we have to be careful. They did not want that. They wanted to be real dancers and do real training.
All of this research sounds really interesting. It's such a comprehensive collection of essays. When I came across it, I was so excited. I immediately added it to my Amazon cart. So any listeners who are interested in this research should definitely order the book. It's called The Evolving Feminine Ballet Body. But also I was interested because I know that these essays sort of explore the transformation of the ballet body alongside kind of the background of the history and meaning of ballet. And I'm curious how, in your research or, in working with your students, how have you found that this idea of the sort of stereotypical ballet body has influenced, broader society and culture's view of femininity and what it means to be a woman?
I think it has huge influence. And because we also did some studies of my bar classes. And then does it change, particularly like the media image of bar classes? Does it change the image, or is it more influenced by the stereotypical traditional image of ballerina? And we found that it's more impacted by the traditional image of ballerina, and that's why people come to those classes. They want to create that ballet body, that hyperflexible, very thin, and certainly not like muscular, but more like lean body. So that really impacts the bar classes that are now quite popular. So now it has emerged into this fitness industry as well, and impacts that now quite strongly because they are quite popular. So it does have an impact, and it still could be maybe considered the ultimate feminine body. The thing about the ballet body is the hyperflexibility as well. That was an added requirement to the fit feminine body. That was also to be thin and could be relatively muscular and toned, whereas there was no need to have that hyperflexibility at that point. So it certainly does have an impact as an ideal feminine body. And if you think about it, I think like we wrote about in the history thing, the prima ballerinas in 1800s, they weren't necessarily that thin, and they were kind of softy, and the flexibility requirement was very different because of the clothing. So in that sense, it has evolved into this hyper-flexible, very thin, and kind of lean-looking body. And it does have impact on what we think kind of an ideal physically active body is.
I think this is really interesting kind of when you take a look at the history of ballet, because as you mentioned, things have changed so much since its onset. And I'm curious, and I don't know if anyone really has the answer to this question, but just based on your research into the history of ballet, what do you think has contributed to that evolution to where we've gone to such extremes with, thinness, hyperflexibility, this ideal, in ballet?
I don't, because I'm really a historian. And, we always blame Balanchine, don't we? Because it's the Balanchine's idea where he was, that was his favorite kind of body ideal. That long-limbed, thin, hyperflexible ballerina. His ideal certainly had a big impact on that. Because like the ballerinas in Ballet Russe, that was, where Balanchine came from, they weren't like that. Somehow he just had that it creates those beautiful lines, those modern lines that he was quite interested in. So I think it would be a good question for historian of ballet.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, Balanchine, he was definitely one of those complicated geniuses. I love what you said about questioning and the importance of, continuously asking questions in order to help the art form evolve and move forward. And what you mentioned about how adult recreational dancers are more likely to do that. And I think that makes sense, because there's less pressure. You're not trying to move up in a company or build a career. You're doing it just for the love of it. And the book touches on this idea of a ballet body sometimes being, celebrated and sometimes being vilified. Some see it as demonstrative of a ballet dancer's, strength and dedication, and others see it as a source of exclusion that can be, really destructive to the art form. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on how those in the dance field should be continuously re-examining this idea of a ballet body. What questions should they be asking themselves in order to keep kind of pushing the art form to evolve while still embracing tradition?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, because then, of course, the world is changing around ballet too. And of course, the classical ballet repertoire was mainly created in Russia, right? With Petipa and all those people. And ballet companies still perform those ballets that the audiences don't really understand anymore, the gestures and all that audiences then would have understood. So at the moment, it's also very expensive to put those kind of performances. So, for example, in Alberta, we don't have all that much money to put into ballet and arts. So the companies are now moving more towards kind of a fusion of contemporary and then ballet, and seldom, maybe sometimes, like Christmas, they have Nutcracker. But then they also have these other performances that are less expensive, less dependent on huge amounts of dancers, less dependent on the chorus, less dependent on that kind of thing, and then more flexible to tour as well. So maybe that commercial imperative can also be positive.
Ballet and all different forms of dance do tend to evolve as new choreographers come in. Different styles of movement are introduced. So it'll be interesting to see how things continue to evolve in the future. And kind of going back to your Psychology Today blog, because this is how I was first introduced to your work. You wrote a really great article about what we can learn from adult recreational ballet dancers. And I thought it was really fascinating that in the article you presented some research that found that adult recreational ballet dancers find so much of their identity and sense of self in a ballet class. And when surveyed, they identified as ballet dancers, and that kind of gave them a new way of thinking of themselves. So can you talk about some of the mental health benefits for, adults who are engaging in these recreational classes who are, maybe older?
They can also dance with other dancers who are similar to them. That's also big for my own dance group. Dance with people who are similar to you in age, but also kind of skill level. So then that creates that their own group that is supportive, and own group that creates that confidence that, yes, I can still move, I can still do things, and that confidence on that I can still live a good life at this age. So those, in my mind, were the kind of psychological benefits. And then, of course, the enjoyment. That's huge. The dancers talk a lot about, I'm dancing because I enjoy it, I love it, passion, those kind of words.
That's an important point. You're there because you're choosing to be there, because it's a form that you love. And I love this as well. I experience it in, my own ballet classes too. I'm in my 30s, so I'm getting dizzier when I'm turning. My extensions aren't, as high as they used to be. And that's a hard realization that your body is just aging, and there are things that are harder than they were before. And I think you're right, being in a class with others who are the same age, same skill level, it impacts your confidence so much, because you think of yourself as ballet dancers rather than adults in a fitness class. And I also thought it was interesting that, as you mentioned, being in a class, sort of the social aspect and the enjoyment of that can really teach you that you have the possibility to dance at any age, because you're around all of these other dancers who are doing it. And I never really thought about that aspect of it, but it's true. And it's really empowering for students, I think, to think about it that way. So how can being in an adult recreational ballet class, or how have you found that to sort of challenge society's perceptions of aging and physical ability, and kind of our own mental perceptions of that as well?
Yeah, like the ones who participated, like in my own study with the local ballet company, I think they're just quite happy be there, and because that was taught by a company member. So the difference between her ability and the people who were there was probably rather large. But in this particular class, the teacher chose to teach it more like a fitness manner rather than, like a ballet bar class. So in that sense, the difference maybe wasn't all that huge. So they had weights and, they had things like that, like in a typical fitness class.
For anyone listening who is maybe, an aspiring researcher or a young academic who's interested in exploring, some of the intersections of dance, where can they get started or what advice would you give them?
Yeah, so my own students, they come to me because they're kind of like me. They are interested in actual doing dance, but then also interested in researching it. They are oftentimes, they question things themselves. They found some problem. So they want to use social sciences to do that rather than go to, like a science laboratory and start looking at genes or, cognitive functioning or neuroscience. So they come to me because they are interested in combining their love to a movement practice with the social science. And typically they also come because they want to make something better. So they either want to teach better, they want to understand something better, they want to dance better, they want to know how people could do it better. So that's why they come to me. So they don't all study aging. That's, of course, my thing. But if one is interested in that kind of thing, then I would then probably seek for a kinesiology type of place to do it. Whereas oftentimes dance departments, particularly in the United States, they focus on improving performance. So if one wants to be a dancer, if one wants to be a choreographer, if one wants to be a teacher of dance, then one should go to a dance department and look for a degree called MFA, Masters of Fine Arts, or BFA, Bachelor of Fine Arts. Whereas if one is interested more in a research area, one would need to think then carefully. Maybe there is a dance department where you could study history of dance, or maybe you could study contemporary forms of mediated dance. So then that's quite different. Or then alternatively in a kinesiology type place where you can look at movement practice, but also combine it with the social science research interest.
I think, that's a great place to get started for anyone who's interested in, either, getting better at dance, as you said, or asking questions and looking at it through the research lens. And I love that, you mentioned the importance of asking questions continuously to keep moving things forward. And you've made a career out of doing that, diving deep into some of these studies and also being a dancer yourself. And so I'm just really inspired by all of the work that you're doing. And I wanted to ask you if there are any upcoming projects or any research that you're excited about that you can share.
Yes, of course. So my current granted research is also exploring the possibilities for digital dance, because for mature women that can be important because, they might live in different places, they connect that way, they also have their own lives, they are busy. So connecting in digital means is quite important, quite like we do. So my latest project was to create a dance film. And I was quite inspired by the research where they talked about the benefits of intergenerational class, of being there with different ages. So this was an intergenerational project where I asked dancers of different ages to create a solo piece based on what they thought aging was. So for somebody, aging was when they went to a pre-professional ballet school but had to quit at 18 because then they just couldn't make it, right? So that was aging. And so we all created these kind of 2 to 3 minute pieces. So they were all solo. And then we had a filmmaker to film them. And then we combined them into film. And we had a musician to create music for us. So that was very, very exciting. And we all created them on our own. So it's totally a digital project. And of course, digital dance is bigger and bigger now. It's everywhere. That's probably one of the strong futures for dance, and the way that dance can also become even more popular than it is now. So that's kind of exciting project. Then my next project is that with two colleagues, again, it's intergenerational. We are creating those performance ethnographies that I was talking about. So we will all create our own performance ethnography. and then combine them into one performance. So those are my current projects, in addition to my studies of aging.
Well, that is exciting. Two really exciting projects. And I know I love dance film. I think it's such a creative way to present dance performance. And for both of those, the live performance and the film, are you presenting them to the public at all? Or is there any information that listeners could pay attention to?
Yeah, that would be great. I was going to say that I hope there would be some place that people could see them, particularly the intergenerational dance. But the intergenerational dance, we are actually thinking of submitting it to digital dance conferences and things. So it's not quite done yet. So it's not publicly available yet. The performance ethnography project, we are hopefully presenting an academic conference. So it probably won't be publicly available per se. Yet, at least. Maybe at some
that's great.
point.
Well, that's really exciting, and congratulations on both of those projects. And we'll definitely, keep an eye out, at least for the dance film, when it does become publicly available.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again. I don't want to take up too much of your time. We do have one last section on the podcast called Petit Allegro. It's just some quick, fun questions, if you're okay with doing that. Do you have a favorite ballet or contemporary dance performance that you've seen or performed in?
That I've seen. In terms of ballet, I really like Christophe Pike's choreography for, is it the French National Ballet?
This is probably a silly question because I feel like you've done so much and studied so many different areas, but is there an area of research that you haven't explored yet and want to?
I have to say I have done some of it, but that digital dance, like you said, it has so many possibilities. Because with the film, you can really create a different kind of thing. So I would really, really, really like to know more and be able to maybe make my own film.
Yeah, and I'll definitely be paying attention to your work because I think that's really exciting, the project that you're working on. And then I'm curious, throughout your career, what's the best advice that you've ever received?
The best advice? Probably, I would advise also my students and colleagues that one would need to follow one's own passion, and one would need to follow what one finds important in terms of research, and then just follow it despite whether it's popular or whether it's acknowledged. One should just really try to do something that is dear to one's heart and that one is passionate about.
Yeah, find what you love and listen to that and follow it. I think that's great advice. And then the last question I always like to ask everybody who comes on is, in a perfect world, what would ballet look like, or what would you want the ballet world to be?
That's a good question. And I like the fusion of contemporary movement with ballet. And, we tend to maybe think as contemporary dancers that their pointers are limiting. But I think kind of a nice fusion with that kind of a questioning fusion with the contemporary movement. I also would like the idea that men and women dancers do similar movements instead of men always lifting and women looking aesthetic and beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's really important, having that gender equality and also the diversity of, body types and backgrounds, but diversity of movement as well, as you said. I think that's an exciting space for ballet to evolve to. And I've really enjoyed our conversation. I love all of the work that you're doing and just really appreciate you taking the time to come on and speak with me, and congrats on everything that you've accomplished.
Thank you so much for connecting. I was listening to your podcast and wow, they were just very insightful and great. So thanks so much for connecting and having me as a part of your podcast.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And it's an honor to have you. It truly was an honor to have Pirkko on this podcast. She shared so many interesting topics and is diving into so many cool things with her research. I could have probably talked to her all day. Links to her blog, Fit Femininity, as well as her essay collection, The Evolving Feminine Ballet Body, are both in the show notes if you want to learn more. A few things before we wrap up. First, I interviewed Daniel Watt, director and producer of the award-winning documentary Everybody Dance, at the beginning of July. You can check out that episode anywhere you get your podcasts if you missed it, and his film is available for free on Amazon Prime. I mentioned that his film was nominated for an Emmy, and I wanted to update our listeners that he won. The film won an Emmy in the Independent Programming category at the Television Academy's 76th Emmy Awards in Los Angeles. So Dan is now an Emmy-winning filmmaker, which is a pretty cool title and a pretty big honor that we got to have him on this podcast. So a big congratulations to Dan on behalf of the Adult Ballet Studio. Second, I also wanted to let you know that the Adult Ballet Studio is nominated for the Women in Podcasting Awards this year. Thank you so much to everybody for your support to help us grow and receive this nomination. We're nominated in the Arts and Design category, and these are listener-voted awards. So if you have time and want to send us a little extra love, you can vote for the Adult Ballet Studio in the Arts and Design category at womenpodcasters.com/vote from now until October 1st. You can only vote once, and a link is in the show notes. We're so grateful to the Women in Podcasting Network for this nomination and for all of our listeners, guests, and friends who have supported this podcast. And finally, there's no mid-month episode for August because I'll be on vacation later this month. So the Adult Ballet Studio will be back with a new episode on Tuesday, September 3rd. Feel free to reach out to me in the meantime on social media at eblosfield or via email at theadultballetstudio@gmail.com. Links to those in the show notes as well. Enjoy the rest of your summer if it's summer where you are. And we have another great guest coming in September, so stay tuned. Happy dancing, everybody, and see you at the bar.